I was born and raised in a small town called Miller's Hollow. It was the kind of place that you could blink and miss while driving by, with just a handful of houses, a general store, and a few other modest buildings that made up its heart. My parents had lived there their whole lives, as had their parents before them. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's name and every secret, or at least that's what I thought. Growing up, I never imagined I'd leave Miller's Hollow. There was something comforting in the predictability of it, the quiet roads, the familiar faces, the way the sun filtered through the trees in the early morning as I walked to school. But when I got older, I felt the inevitable pull of the world outside those narrow borders. Life beyond the hollow seemed to promise adventure, excitement, and opportunities. Still, I always thought I'd return. I left for college a few towns over but came back often, holidays, long weekends, and breaks. My parents still lived in the house I grew up in, and it was home. But the weekend everything changed was supposed to be just like any other. I had gone away with a few friends for a short trip, nothing special, just a getaway to break the monotony of our daily lives. On Sunday afternoon, I packed up my things, said goodbye to my friends, and drove back to Miller's Hollow. As I approached the town, something felt wrong, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It wasn't until I reached where the town should have been that the truth began to sink in. The familiar bend in the road appeared, the same one I had driven countless times. But instead of the sight of my town, the small row of houses, the church steeple peeking over the trees, the general store, I saw nothing. Just an empty field, stretching out in every direction. My heart raced as I slowed the car to a crawl, pulling off to the side of the road and getting out. Where is everything?" I muttered aloud, my voice shaky. I walked toward where my house had stood, where I had spent my entire childhood. But there was nothing there. No street, no homes, no buildings. Just grass and trees, as though the town had never existed. The wind picked up, blowing through the trees, and the eerie silence settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stood there, rooted to the spot, refusing to believe what I was seeing. My town, my entire town, had disappeared. I fumbled for my phone, dialing my parents' number, but the call wouldn't go through. I tried again, and again, each time met with the same infuriating result: no service. Maybe I had gotten lost. Maybe I had taken the wrong road, but that wasn't possible. I knew every inch of the drive back to Miller's Hollow. There was no way I had taken a wrong turn. Frantic, I jumped back into my car and drove to the nearest town, about 20 miles away, hoping someone there could explain what was happening. When I arrived, I rushed into the local diner, out of breath and on the verge of panic. "I need help," I said, approaching the counter where an older woman in an apron stood, wiping her hands on a rag. She looked at me with mild concern. "What's the matter, hon?" "My town," I stammered. "Miller's Hollow. It's gone. It was just there a few days ago, but now it's like it never existed." Her face creased with confusion. "Miller's Hollow," she repeated. "Where's that?" I blinked, trying to make sense of her question. "It's about 20 miles from here. You must know it, it's been here for over 100 years. She shook her head slowly, her brow furrowed. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've never heard of Miller's Hollow." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I was born there. I grew up there. My parents still live there." The woman glanced around at the few other patrons, who were now staring at me. One of them, a middle-aged man sitting at the counter, chimed in. "You sure you're not mistaken, kid? I've lived around here all my life too, and I've never heard of any place called Miller's Hollow." Panic surged in my chest. No. This can't be happening. Miller's Hollow has been there for generations. It's real, I swear. The woman stepped around the counter and gently took my arm, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Why don't you sit down, honey? Maybe you're just confused. Towns don't just disappear. But I wasn't confused. I knew Miller's Hollow existed. I had just been there days ago. I refused to sit down, pulling out my phone and searching for any record of the town. I typed in Miller's Hollow, but nothing came up. No maps, no websites, no history. It was as if the town had never existed. I ran out of the diner, desperate for answers. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe this was all some kind of twisted joke. I drove to the local library, hoping I could find something, anything, that would prove Miller's Hollow was real. But as I combed through old records, town registries, and maps, there was nothing. Not a single mention of Miller's Hollow anywhere. I spent hours searching, my desperation growing by the minute. By the time the sun began to set, I was no closer to finding any answers. I called every friend, every relative I could think of, but no one had any memory of the town. Even people who had visited before said they didn't remember ever going there. It was like I was the only one who remembered Miller's Hollow. The drive back to where my town should have been felt surreal. The fields stretched out under the dusky sky, mocking me with their emptiness. I pulled over once again, standing in the place where my house had stood, where my childhood had been. I shouted into the open air, "What happened to you? Where did you go?" There was no response, only the rustling of the wind through the grass. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I contacted local authorities, filed missing person reports, but nothing came of it. They treated me like I was crazy. The town, they said, had never existed. Miller's Hollow wasn't on any map, in any record, or in anyone's memory except mine. But I knew what I had seen. I had lived there for over 2 decades. I had spent my entire life in that town, and now it was gone. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince people. No one believed me, and I began to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. Miller's Hollow had been real, and something had made it vanish. One night, weeks after the town disappeared, I had a dream. In it, I was walking through Miller's Hollow, but everything was wrong. The streets were empty, the houses decayed, crumbling into the ground as I passed by. There was no sound, no wind, no voices, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. I walked to my childhood home, or what was left of it. The front door hung off its hinges, and the windows were broken. Inside, everything was covered in dust, like it had been abandoned for centuries. Then I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, moving just beyond the edges of my vision. I turned, but there was nothing there. I could feel it, though, something watching me, following me. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnameable presence. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The dream felt too real, too vivid. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was something more. Something that was trying to tell me the truth. Miller's Hollow hadn't just disappeared. It had been taken, by something ancient, something that didn't want to be found. And I was the only one who remembered. The town that disappeared overnight. I had been on the road for hours, heading west toward the mountains. It was late, and the sun had long since dipped below the horizon. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, winding through dense woods and fields, with nothing but the occasional distant glow of farmhouse lights. I wasn't in a rush, but after driving for so long, I was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion settling in. Just as I began to consider pulling over for the night, I saw a sign ahead, a simple wooden marker with weathered paint. "Welcome to Pine Hollow," it read. The name didn't ring any bells, but I'd passed through dozens of small towns on my journey. I figured this was just another sleepy, forgotten spot on the map. The town appeared as if it had been plucked out of time, frozen in an era long past. The main street was lined with old brick buildings, their signs hanging above darkened storefronts. A lone streetlight flickered as I drove by, casting eerie shadows on the empty sidewalk. I spotted a small diner up ahead, its neon open sign glowing faintly in the misty air. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since noon. I parked my car in front of the diner and stepped out into the cool night. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The door to the diner creaked as I pushed it open, and a bell above jingled, announcing my arrival. Inside, the place was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town diner: booths with cracked vinyl seats, a jukebox in the corner, and a long counter with stools. Behind the counter, an older woman stood, wiping down a coffee pot. She glanced up and smiled. "Well, look at you, stranger. Haven't seen a new face around here in a while. What brings you to Pine Hollow?" I smiled back, trying to shake off the slight unease I felt. "Just passing through. Been on the road all day, thought I'd grab something to eat." "Well, you came to the right place. We've got the best pie in town," she said with a wink. "You want coffee?" "Yeah, please. Black." She nodded and poured a steaming cup, setting it in front of me. "Name's Mabel, by the way." "What's yours?" "Dan," I replied. "Nice to meet you, Mabel." As I sat sipping my coffee, I glanced around. There were only a few other patrons, a couple sitting quietly in one of the booths, and an older man at the end of the counter, hunched over a newspaper. Mabel returned with a slice of pie and slid it in front of me. "You just passing through, or you plan to stay the night?" I hadn't planned on staying, but now that I'm here, I might. "Is there a motel around?" "Yeah, just down the road a bit. The Pine Hollow Inn. It's not much, but it's clean and quiet. You won't have any trouble sleeping." "Thanks," I said, taking a bite of the pie. It was surprisingly good, warm, sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. "This is great." Mabel beamed. "Glad you like it. My grandmother's recipe." I finished the pie and spent a few more minutes chatting with Mabel, mostly small talk about the weather and the town. She mentioned how quiet Pine Hollow had become over the years, with most folks moving on to bigger cities. "Not much left here now but memories," she said, her eyes distant for a moment. I paid my bill, thanked her for the meal, and made my way to the Pine Hollow Inn. It was exactly as Mabel had described: small, quiet, and clean. I settled into the room, exhausted from the drive, and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to get back on the road. I packed up my things and headed out, expecting to pass through Pine Hollow again on my way to the highway. But as I drove, something felt wrong. The road was the same, winding through the trees, but where the town should have been, there was nothing. No buildings. No diner. No Pine Hollow Inn. I pulled over, confused. The street that I had driven down just hours ago had vanished. I stepped out of the car, scanning the area. There wasn't a single sign that the town had ever existed. The road was empty, flanked by dense woods, with no indication that there had ever been a diner or a motel. Not even a foundation or a rusted signpost remained. My heart began to race as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, or rather, not seeing. Had I taken a wrong turn? No, I had driven straight back down the same road I'd come from the night before. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see an animal, but instead, an old man stepped out from the trees. He was the same man I'd seen in the diner the night before, hunched over his newspaper. "You're looking for Pine Hollow, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, too stunned to speak. The old man shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "It's gone." "Just like that?" "What do you mean, gone?" I demanded. "I was just there last night. I had dinner at the diner, talked to Mabel." "Mabel," the man interrupted, his expression darkening. "She hasn't been around for years." I stared at him, my mind spinning. What are you talking about? I spoke to her. She served me coffee and pie. I stayed at the inn. The inn burned down 20 years ago, the man said softly. And Mabel, well, she's been dead just as long. I felt a chill creep down my spine. That's impossible. The man looked at me with a mix of pity and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Pine Hollow disappeared a long time ago. One night, the whole town just vanished. No one knows why, but every now and then, it comes back. Not for long, just enough to remind us it existed. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. No, that can't be. I was there. The old man sighed and turned back toward the trees. You were lucky. Most who find the town don't make it out. I watched as he disappeared into the woods, his words echoing in my mind. My hands shook as I climbed back into my car and drove away, the ghost of Pine Hollow lingering in my thoughts. As I sped down the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than simply getting lost. Pine Hollow was gone, but somehow, it wasn't done with me yet. It had been a perfect day for hiking. The early morning sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting soft golden rays on the trail ahead. I had planned this solo hike for weeks, a chance to get away from the noise of the city, breathe in the fresh mountain air, and clear my mind. The forest was a labyrinth of towering trees, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze, and the faint scent of pine clung to the air. I'd started my hike early, following a well-marked trail that wound deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest. After several hours, I noticed that the trail markers had become scarce, but I wasn't too worried. I had my map and compass, and the area wasn't known for being particularly treacherous. Besides, I enjoyed the feeling of being off the beaten path, surrounded by nothing but nature. It was late afternoon when I stumbled upon it, the town. I had crested a hill, thinking I'd soon need to find a spot to set up camp, when I saw it nestled in the valley below. It was small, almost quaint, with a cluster of old wooden buildings arranged around what looked like a town square. A faded church steeple rose above the rooftops, its weathered cross tilted slightly. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney on one of the houses, and I could just make out the sound of a distant bell ringing. I stopped in my tracks, staring down at the town in disbelief. I had studied the area before my hike. There wasn't supposed to be any settlement here. Not even a logging camp or ranger station. The nearest town was miles away, and this place didn't show up on any of the maps I had looked at. Curiosity got the better of me. I made my way down the hill, the sense of mystery gnawing at the back of my mind. As I approached, I noticed how old the town seemed. The buildings were constructed of weathered timber, their paint peeling and windows clouded with age. Yet, for a place so deep in the woods, it looked surprisingly well kept. It didn't have the overgrown, abandoned look of a ghost town. I entered what appeared to be the main street. The cobblestone road beneath my feet was cracked, with grass pushing through the gaps, but it still felt solid. A few wooden signs creaked in the breeze: general store, blacksmith, inn. An eerie silence hung over the place, broken only by the soft sigh of the wind through the trees. There were no cars, no electric lights, no telephone lines, nothing to indicate any connection to the modern world. I walked down the street, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. A chill ran down my spine. The place felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Then, I saw movement. A figure emerged from one of the buildings, an old woman dressed in simple, old-fashioned clothes. She had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of her face. She didn't look at me as she crossed the street, moving slowly, deliberately, as if she were caught in some trance. I tried to call out to her, but my voice seemed to catch in my throat. The words wouldn't come. I watched as she disappeared into another building, a bakery, judging by the faded sign above the door. The faint smell of freshly baked bread reached my nose, making my stomach growl. The sensation was unsettling. How could a place like this still be functioning? Before I could gather the courage to approach the bakery, another figure appeared, this time, a man. He was dressed in a long coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He walked with the same slow, deliberate gait as the woman, crossing the street and disappearing into the church. No one spoke. No one acknowledged my presence. It was like the town was stuck in time, frozen, yet somehow still alive. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to leave, to get as far away from this strange place as possible. But another part of me, driven by curiosity, wanted to stay. Maybe it was just an eccentric group of people living off the grid. Maybe I had stumbled upon some forgotten commune or religious sect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, I made my way to the inn. The wooden sign above the door swayed gently in the breeze. Hollowbrook Inn, it read in faded gold letters. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The inside was surprisingly cozy, with a crackling fire in the hearth and a large, inviting armchair in the corner. A woman stood behind the counter, her graying hair tied back in a neat bun. She looked up as I entered, her face expressionless. "Welcome," she said in a voice that was flat, almost mechanical. "You'll be staying the night?" I nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. Yes. If that's okay. How much is a room?" She didn't answer, just slid a key across the counter. "Room 3, she said. "Up the stairs, last door on the left." I took the key, feeling a cold shiver run through me as our fingers brushed. Her skin was icy to the touch. "Thank you," I murmured, heading up the narrow staircase. The room was small but clean. A single bed with an iron frame, a wooden dresser, and a small window that overlooked the town square. I set my pack down on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. The whole situation felt surreal, like I had wandered into a dream, or a nightmare. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the faint sounds of the town outside. Soft footsteps on the cobblestone street, the distant murmur of voices, the occasional creak of a door. But when I looked out the window, the town square was empty. No one was there. Sleep did not come easily. My dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, strange figures moving in the dark, their faces hidden. I awoke several times, heart pounding, but each time I looked out the window, the town remained silent, still. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I must have finally drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, the sun was streaming through the window. The air was cold, and I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, like I was waking from a deep, unsettling slumber. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and looked out the window. And froze. The town was gone. I blinked, thinking I must still be dreaming, but when I looked again, the scene outside was the same, an empty field, stretching out in every direction. The cobblestone streets, the buildings, the church, the inn, it had all vanished. In its place was nothing but a vast, open field, with tall grass swaying in the breeze. The trees that had once surrounded the town were still there, standing like silent sentinels on the edge of the field, but the town itself was gone, as if it had never existed. Panic gripped me as I jumped out of bed and threw open the door. The hallway outside my room was gone. I was standing in the middle of the field, the wooden floorboards beneath my feet dissolving into grass and earth. I turned in every direction, searching for any sign of the town, of the inn, of the people I had seen the night before, but there was nothing. Just the wind, the trees, and the endless stretch of grass. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined the entire thing? Had I wandered off the trail and hallucinated the town? No, that couldn't be. I had seen it. I had stayed there. I had spoken to the woman at the inn. I stumbled through the field, calling out for anyone, anything, but there was no response. The town had disappeared, and I was alone. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I found the trail again. I followed it back to where I had started, my mind still reeling from the events of the night. When I finally reached civilization, I tried to tell my story to the rangers, to the locals, to anyone who would listen, but no one believed me. Pine Hollow, they said, had never existed. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened. And every night since, I've dreamed of that town, of the strange figures that walked its streets, of the voices that whispered in the dark.